Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. My name is Nikki Clinch, and I am your host. I am a maturation facilitator, teacher and coach, integrative holistic health counselor, breathwork facilitator, and author. I am the founder of the Academy of Maturation Coaching, the Alchemy of Being, where I train as many people as I can to become powerful spaces for human beings to come home to their authentic truth. Maturation is a powerful evolutionary process of dissolving trauma, breaking free of stuck patterns, and growing and healing at the taproot. Growing out of who we thought we were from the stories led by our past conditioning in order to grow and evolve into who we were born to be. In this podcast, I will be sharing many different things with you, opening up the doorways to my coaching sessions where you can witness with your own eyes how trauma contaminates our reality and how we can dissolve it, heal it at the root, and rewrite the story of our lives, reclaiming our power and reminding each one of us that who we are is wholeness. I will be interviewing some of the world's most prominent teachers in spirituality, healing, transformation, and human evolvement, and sharing with you my own teachings and learnings along the way. And above all, sharing with you my heart. The purpose of this podcast is to remind each one of you who you really are, to open up the doorway to a new possibility, to a new paradigm, to healing, health, transformation, and our evolvement as individuals and a species. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. One thing that you can do for me, if you find this podcast useful and if you love it, please do subscribe. And if you feel called to, leave a review, because reviews really matter. They help to spread the word and help to spread this podcast to as many people as we can. And lastly, if you have any big aha moments, any shifts, any insights in any of these episodes, please do share it with me. Share with me which episode it was, where in the episode it happened, and how it has impacted you and your life. So without further ado, let's get going. I hope you enjoy today's episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my journey with psychedelics and plant medicine. So this is following on from part 1. If you haven't listened to that yet, please go and listen to it, because it is an important part of the whole story and the whole learning and the whole teaching. So now I'm going to go into the second journey that I took when I returned to the Amazon last year in 2019. You know, I had 10 years between the first trip and the second trip, where I worked with no plants and I worked with no psychedelics. When I left the Amazon the first trip, I was super clear that I was not interested in working with ayahuasca again. Not that I hated it, not that I wanted to turn my back on it, but I was like, I'm done. Like, that was such an intense 5 weeks. And so I really didn't feel any calling to work with the plants until I did. So last year in 2019, exactly 10 years from when I returned the first trip, I was driving down the street. And literally, this is how it happened. I was driving down the street, and all of a sudden, this track comes on my CD machine in my car. And it was an album that I bought in Peru in the first trip. And I hadn't heard it all this time. I don't know how it ended up in there. My husband must have put the CD in. And suddenly my car was being blasted by this beautiful music. And I was just transported back to being in the Amazon. And my whole body was like, it was like coming home. And then before I knew it, I said out loud, oh my God, I want to return to Peru. I want to work with the plants again. And it just came out of me, and I was And then as soon as I heard myself say it, I was just absolutely crystal clear that I wanted to work with the plants again and that I wanted to find a way to return to Peru. And I wasn't thinking about how yet, but I just knew that I was being called again. And then literally, no joke, 2 days later, I get a call from my friend Emma Cannon. And she goes, I have to share something with you. And she shares with me her experience with plants. And on the phone, I'm like, oh my God, I literally just said out loud that I want to work with the plants again. And it just kept coming and coming, these messages and messages. And then literally, I am not joking, a week later, Emma sent me an email and she said, look at this. And it was a link for a retreat in the Amazon that Gabor Mate was leading, an alignment master training in the Amazon in Peru. 2 weeks of alignment training for leaders in the world of health and healing. And I read it, and everything in me knew that I was meant to be there. You know, it wasn't even a question of doubt. You know, I was at a point in my life, you know, my work was going pretty well. I was starting to train people professionally, and everything was kind of stepping up and ramping up. And I had just been signed to write my book. And I felt this extraordinary calling that I needed to go and hear what Mother Earth needs from us in order to make the changes that needed to happen for the next phase of our evolution. And so when I saw this invitation by Gabor, I was like, I know I'm meant to be there. But the retreat was full. It was already sold out. It was already full. So they weren't even releasing application forms. And so Emma was like, oh, well, maybe we'll go next year. And I was like, no, babe, I'm meant to be there this time. So I wrote to them and I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I am meant to be there. And so if anything changes, please let me apply. And I already knew that they were going to let me. I don't know how I knew, I just knew. Within 24 hours, I received an email from them saying, we'd like you to apply. And so I filled out the application form. You know, by the way, at this time, my husband was in hospital with having just had heart surgery. So I hadn't even talked this through with him. You know, he was in hospital. I was at home. I'd received this application form. And it was the most intense application form I've ever filled out in my whole life. It must have been like 5-6 pages long. And when I got to the end of it and I pressed send, I was like, I know that they're going to write back to me and give me a space. I don't know how. I mean, they were full and they had a waiting list of like hundreds of people. Apparently like 300 people applied and there were only 21 spaces and they were all sold out. But I knew that I was going to get a space. And I remember feeling quite sick when I pressed send. The next day, I was sitting with my husband in hospital and just sitting by his bedside. He'd come out of 6 hours of surgery. And I didn't mention it. I hadn't mentioned it yet. And I was like, how am I going to tell this to him? Maybe I should just wait. I'll just wait. I'll wait. I don't know. I haven't got a place yet. I'll wait. And I got home and there was an email and I was being invited to come. And I had 48 hours to give them a decision. And I felt sick because I knew that I was going to go. And I knew that meant that I was going to have to leave my son. Callum was only 9 months old at the time and still breastfeeding. I mean, he's still breastfeeding now, but he was like heavily breastfeeding. My husband had just come out of heart surgery. And to leave for 2 weeks and be in the Amazon, like with no contact, how is that even possible? My mind was like, how is that possible? How are you going to do this? Da, 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 da. But my heart was like, I just know I'm meant to be there. And so again, similar to part one, like my mind was trying to understand and find all the logical understandings and the reasons and how can this work and this can't work. It doesn't make sense. And my heart was like, yes, I know I am meant to be there. So I told my husband. He was pretty supportive, unbelievably supportive. I worked with my teacher on finding ways to make it really whole for the kids. I pumped as much breast milk as I possibly could. I wrote a letter for Taya to open every day, so she would feel me in her space every day. And in the letters, I would write as if I could sense where I was in the jungle. So I would, I would share my journey and my experience with her. Day 3, here I am in my hut, and this is what we're doing today. I was kind of predicting what we would be doing, and I gave all the letters to my husband, and he would read them out to her each day. And then I started my dieta, and it had been 10 years since I'd done a dieta like this. And just like the first time, as we got closer to me leaving, the work was beginning. And so I was starting to experience this enormous uncomfortability. My husband and I were not in a good place in our marriage. We were pretty much living 2 separate lives. And it had been a long time since we had felt connected and intimate and bonded. But we were kind of just ignoring it and just getting by. This is just the way you do it, right? But as we got closer to me leaving, it was just becoming undeniable how huge the gaps between us had become. And I was just getting so burnt out with how much work I was doing. It was just client after client after client after client after client. And I was starting to experience this enormous amount of burnout. And so I started to do my dieta. No salt, no sugar, no alcohol, no sex, no meat, no spices, no fermented foods, no oils, no fat. Yeah. 2 weeks of really, really, really clean food. Cleaning your body, getting your body ready, meditating every day, journaling every day. Preparing mind, body, heart, and soul, and doing it with integrity. The plants are not a game. Doing it with integrity and honor and respect. And then I flew, and I got back on the plane, and I flew straight into Iquitos, and I just felt so nervous. I knew that my life was about to change. What was different about this 2 weeks? And this time I was at the Temple of the Way of Light, which, by the way, I would highly recommend anyone goes to work there. The maestros there, the Shipibo tribe, are the most profoundly powerful maestros I have ever been honored to work with. They are doctors. They are doctors and surgeons of the soul. I mean, this is called soul surgery. I called it soul surgery because of that trip. They are surgeons of the soul, of the highest level. And it was an honor and a gift to receive their mastery and their healing. And over those 2 weeks, we would be intensely in a program of maturation all through the day. And I didn't even know this, right? So the facilitator, Richard Condon, and Gabor, Richard was trained by my teacher, David Norris. I didn't even know this. And so he was speaking my language. He was leading this work that I lead. And so it was so synchronistic. And so we would be in this intense process all through the day, just absolutely looking at the story that has been running your life and how your trauma is getting in the way. They would say to us, alignment cannot be done a little bit. You're either in alignment or you're not in alignment. And so by day 3, immediately when they said that, I already started to see how I was in alignment in what I was offering in the world. But the absolute lack of communication and honesty and truth in my marriage was completely out of alignment. The way that I was pushing myself and burning out my body to work and work and work was completely out of alignment. And, the first days I had to face, where I was being out of integrity in my life and why. Why was I not speaking my needs? Why was I not being honest and truthful to myself? Why was I pushing myself so much? And so we would do this intense mind work and perception work and seeing how we've been being in the day. And then we would go in and we would work with ayahuasca. So over the 12 days we were there, we worked with ayahuasca 5 times. In the first ceremony, I asked ayahuasca to help me to know my worth and value. And it was so profound. Immediately I was 4 years old and I started to experience all this love coming towards me from my grandmother and from my nanny, from, family friends, my godmother, my aunts. I was just absorbing all this love. And what I realized was, I had spent so much, all my life, focusing on where the love hadn't come from. So I felt unloved, that I had never really fully realized how loved I was by all these other people. I hadn't let it in. I hadn't let myself receive it because I was so focused on where it wasn't coming from. And so I just absorbed all this love from all these people that had been in my life and loved me so much. And I felt just full of love. And the maestros would be singing their icaros in the ceremony, and it just felt like they were just loving me. I would just cry. I was crying with gratitude for how loved I felt. And then I became the tree of life. And my hair became, the branches and the leaves, and then all these butterflies were flying in my hair. And then ayahuasca said to me, look up and feed yourself. And I looked up and I reached up and I grabbed all this energy and I fed it into my mouth, and I literally swallowed all this golden light. And I just kept doing the same, feeding myself. And what she was teaching me was, because of my lack of worth, because I believed that I was unloved, because I thought I was not lovable as I am, I had been pushing and burning myself out, looking outside of myself to try and feed myself. More clients, more work, more money, more pushing, more, that I had forgotten that there was enough food all around me, and all I needed to do was to feed myself with it. That life was everywhere, and I was already loved and lovable. And it was just such a profound healing. And then we carried on doing the work, really like looking at where we'd been out of integrity, looking at where we weren't being honest with ourselves in the day, and doing that deep integration work in the day, which was so powerful. And then we'd go into a drink ceremony in the evening. And the second and third ceremonies for me were just enormous amounts of purging. Just, I remember feeling so sick, like nauseous in my skin. And I realized, she was showing me that all the thoughts that I had thought badly of myself and judged myself, they had been like arrows of negativity into my being. And I had all the projections I had received from other people in my life, from their judgments and their resentments. I had received it all, and she was teaching me that our thoughts are like arrows that go into people and go into ourselves. And I had received so much negativity, and it was making me sick. And I was just nauseous for like 3 hours. And so I then started just touching my whole body and just speaking and thinking only love. And as I started to do that, I love you, thank you, I love you, thank you. As I started to do that, the nausea would start releasing. And I realized I was healing myself with love, with my own love. It was such a profound learning. And it was similar in ceremony 3. And then ceremony 4, I asked ayahuasca, help me to know my soul calling. And this was the profound healing. This was when ayahuasca took me right to the taproot of the original trauma. I was in my mother's womb, and she had experienced a trauma, and I received that trauma, and I almost lost my life. And my whole life I had lived in this survival, this feeling that I was always about to die. Something terrible was about to happen. And that's why I never really fully surrendered. I never fully trusted. And I always lived in this constant state of survival. And ayahuasca made me feel it, face it. And it was absolutely terrifying and painful. But as I faced it and felt it fully, it started to release and I started to heal. And she was showing me that my work in the world was to awaken human life, awaken people. People are awakened is my calling. And then the final ceremony was so much about forgiveness. And she showed me my husband. And I saw so much love in his heart, so much love in mine. And as I went home after that trip, I had integration to now face. And I came home and I realized that my husband and my marriage was based on untruths, or it had become that. And so we spoke truth to each other those first few days after returning home, and we separated for 6 months as we did deep, deep work on ourselves and with each other in couples therapy, really releasing all that trauma-led choices that we had made and releasing the masks that we had been hiding behind with each other. And I talk much more deeply about that journey in my book, so I'm not going to go into it now. But then I also realized that this whole warrior woman brand that I had been using and that I'd even been signed by Hay House to write the book on, it was all based on my survival of my trauma. This armored woman. And so I let that book die, and I told my editor that's not the book I was meant to write, and I let that part of my brand die. And there was so much of that first 6 months after returning back from that trip that was about letting the things I had built in my life based on my trauma choices, letting them go, and trusting that the authenticity and the vulnerability of who I truly am can come through, and it is safe. That I can live here as me, not needing to survive my past, but as my full whole self. And I'm still deeply benefiting from that trip. And I know now, when the pandemic hit, I knew that that's why I went out there. I knew that it was part of the training to get ready for what was shifting in the world. And so again, I want to say, if you feel called to work with the plants, please work with the right people. Go on recommendation. I highly recommend the Temple of the Way of Light. I highly recommend going and working with the Shipibo. Unbelievable. And please remember that the big healing, the big work is in the integration. What are you willing to change and be responsible for and do after you come home? And then I want to share one more ceremony. 5 months into my separation with my husband, and it had been a very painful 5 months living apart, painful couples therapy. Really, really wasn't sure whether we were going to make it. It really felt like we were heading for divorce. And I went to New York and I worked with psilocybin. And I had the most amazing psilocybin ceremony where I asked psilocybin to help me to forgive everything. I needed to release this hate, this anger in my heart. We had fought so much and it was hurting me, and I wanted to forgive. I just wanted to forgive. And it was such a powerful, powerful ceremony. Psilocybin is mushrooms and exceptionally powerful. Very different to ayahuasca, but extremely powerful. And psilocybin made me see and face and feel fully the impact of my words, my anger, my judgments, my resentments that had on me and on him and on my daughter, and then made me face it, and then made me see myself as a little girl, where the root of that behavior even came from. And so I forgave myself while I also forgave him. And then it made me see the impact of his behavior and anger and hurt and resentment on me and my daughter and on him. And then it made me see him as a little boy and where that came from. And it was just unbelievable healing. I just had so much compassion for him and myself and everyone involved. And then, just like a dam opening, my heart just cracked open and I just grieved. Finally, I grieved that marriage, the end of that marriage that we had. And I must have cried for like an hour, and proper sobbing. It was painful, but an enormous release. When I came out of that ceremony, I felt so at peace. And I felt at peace with my husband. I still didn't know what was going to happen next, but I wasn't holding on anymore to any resentment or the past, that I had released whatever marriage we had had. And I believe very strongly that that was the beginning of us making a new relationship between each other. And, we started to heal. And 3 months later, we remarried. We renewed our vows. Psilocybin is a really powerful medicine. And so I would recommend, if you feel called to working with psilocybin, to always work with someone who's holding space, a facilitator, and making sure that you have a really clear intention. And if it gets tough, instead of resisting, just say yes. Be willing to face everything. And again, the real healing, yes, it happens in the ceremony, but it happens in the integration. We are coming out of an old paradigm, a paradigm of the way things, the systems that have been running our world and running our health systems. And I truly believe that plant medicines and psychedelics are a fundamental part of the new paradigm that we are moving into. But it is really important that you work with them with the right people, recommendation, and you work with them with integrity and with the right intentions. They are not toys. These are not games. These are major teachers. These are huge teachers. So go and work with them to learn, to be a student with humility, and an open heart and courage. So I hope that these 2 episodes have been helpful for you. Psychedelics and plant medicines have changed my life, and I will continue working with them. I am absolutely aiming to head back to Peru as soon as I can when the borders open up and it feels right after my move to New Zealand. And they're just a fundamental part of my life now. So I hope that you have found this useful. If there has been any big insights or aha moments for you in this episode, please do share with me and let me know where and why and how it's impacted you. And if you've loved this episode and you really love soul surgery, please leave me a review. Your reviews really matter and they help this work spread far and wide. So thank you so much for listening.